Namaskar and welcome to this exciting episode of Sathology Debunking Mythology. Sat means truth, Logos means the study or science, Sathology means the science of truth or study of truth. Opposite of that is mythology, which means a science of fake lie, imagination, or or just simply fake news. And mythology, the word mythology has been disparagingly used against Vedic literatures, Puranic history, and also medieval history of India, which has been destroyed by the invaders. In fact, the first 10 years after independence of India, the education ministry was handled by people who had whose only purpose was to remove the history of India, and in the name of secularism and many other political gimmicks, the destruction of identity of Hindus was a common cause. And that's what you see that today the hatred against Hindus in the non-Hindus is very high, amongst the non is very high. The same education is being taught in North American universities and other European universities by various academics who are just teaching the same colonial British propaganda and to some extent Islamic propaganda also. I have a very, very special guest, and we are going to cover an important part of Mahabharat history from the point of view of eclipse, and which is a very important phenomena which is recorded in Mahabharat. The star positions, the astronomical positions, and archaeology positions are also mentioned there. So let us welcome my friend Rishi Muni, and whatever epithet you want to give, researcher and also a practitioner, Shri Nilesh Nilkant Oak.
Namaskar, Aditya ji, and I'm glad to be here again.
And Nilesh ji, one of the things which comes is the topic of Hindu Ekta. Everyone talks about it, and the people who talk the most about Hindu Ekta are themselves responsible for not having the Hindu Ekta. You know?
Yes.
It is a dichotomy of I cannot even understand.
Yeah. Well, I can add some thoughts there. It is a dichotomy. See, in the past, some of our programs, not as a main subject, but we have discussed three foundations of Sanatan Vedic Dharma. Sanatak Vedic Dharma. What are those foundations? If we understand those, we start understanding the problem that we see with the Hindu Ekata issue. Hindus should be together, but why they are not together? So what are the three foundations? The two out of those three foundations, or at least one of the three foundations, is not a big issue. So let me just state the three foundation. First foundation is a absolute conviction or conviction into the absolute moral code. Okay, niti dharma. Okay, which is I don't say just the moral code, because moral code can be relative, which you find in Abrahamic religions, for example. And even many other isms, not just limited to Abrahamic thing. And as a Sanskruti, Prakruti, Vikruti, it can come into Hinduism also if we are not careful. So it's not like we can be very lazy about because we have the foundation. No, our foundation can be disturbed. I mean, if you are not careful and if you are not doing the sadhana and if you are not alert. But the fundamental foundation in the sense of ahimsa, satyavasteya, akama, akrodha, lobhata, bhuta priya, hitehacha, just looking at the whole living entities, even non-living entities in the same way. That is usually not the issue. The second issue is somewhat related, but not the most important, but I'll tell you what the second issue is, which is what we call achar sahishnuta, endurance in conduct. Now, which means you have to keep yourself engaged in doing the activities, kriya and karma, as opposed to asking someone to do it. This is when the sattva raja tamas comes into the picture, okay, where the sattva does not want to act much for certain reason, and the tamas doesn't want to act much for the certain reason because it's a tamas, right? So everyone is giving suggestion to others what they ought to do, but no one wants to do it. So that tamas and sometimes even sattva, although it is considered good, okay, can lead to sattva in the sense of somebody says, you know what, I have done it, or I just don't want to deal with this, what's happening in the world, I just want to go and sit in Himalayas. The point is, if you are not protecting the Sanatan Vedic culture, guess what, there are inimical forces who will not let you sit peacefully in the Himalayas. Okay, so that sattva also has to be aware. And the tamasic issue is always asking others to do something. So that's a secondary issue. The third issue, which is, I think, the root, I mean, it's the beauty of Sanatan Vedic Dharma, but it also becomes a somewhat of a challenge for the Hindu Ekata, which is freedom of thought, vichar swatantrya. So everyone has a way to think, and that's why we have many sampradaya, many different upasana paddhati right within Hinduism, right? I mean, you can be in a saguna upasana, you can be in a nirguna upasana, you can be atheist in the Western sense of the term, because atheism is not quite understood, or it doesn't mean exactly the same thing when somebody says atheist in a Hindu context. And some can be very proud Hindu, like Savarkar defined himself as an atheist, and he worked for the Renaissance of Hindu Renaissance, right? I mean, many people outside will not able to, outside the Hindu fold or even inside Hindu fold, will not able to understand. The last point, which is very, very practical, which is based on this thing. It is very, very simple. Take the two words, Durjan and Sajjan. It is a perpetual issue, not limited to Sanatan Vedic Dharma or India. Like for two gentlemen, I mean, for Durjan, like for people who want to do exploitation, slavery, bad things together, exploit the world, exploit other human beings, animals, nature, they can come together. Okay, they are actually Durjan, but they can find it very easy to come together. But it is said in our Shastras also many times, it's very difficult for two Sajjan people to come together, because they have their own way of thinking, they value the freedom of thought, okay, they have this absolute moral code. And then anytime somebody is not doing something, for example, just take a dietary habit, somebody is a non-veg versus veg, that can be a point of fighting for Hindus. Why it should be I mean, it was happening just in one of my discussion group just the other day. Why it should be a point of fighting? Okay, I mean, we understand the pros and cons of every lifestyle, right? Dietary style. Take alcohol, for example. Alcohol by itself is not good or bad. If you go to Ayurveda talks of alcohol as it says at the root level, it is a food. How you make use of it. For example, if you want to what you call clean the wound, you can use alcohol. In most of our Ayurvedic medication, there is a 8% alcohol or so, just like same as wine. Of course, we don't drink it like a wine, but it is to preserve the medication. So that is perfectly fine. By itself is not seen as a good or bad. Okay, but people will take simple issue as a dietary things. I mean, this is the problem of a sajjan, because now they are going to the absolute moral code. Thou shall not take this. Somebody who is a vegan looks at the lacto vegetarian in a problematic fashion. Why are you drinking milk? And let him drink milk. Okay, so I mean, we can have matabhed, different, even matabhed is okay, because that vade jayate tattva bodho. What we cannot have is a manabhed. Unfortunately, that is the problem that is eclipsing, grasping, grasta. It is doing grasta to Hindu ekata. Those are my few thoughts.
No, what you said it, and there is another word used by Savarkar, is the Hindu. I forgot the term there, but I coined my own term, Vikarvadi. Something Vikarvadi. He said Hindu Vikar. I called it pure Hindu syndrome. Like I am purer than you because I chant few mantras additional.
Yeah.
The problem is that we forget the karma and dadati, pratigranati, guhyam, akhyati, prichati, bhunte, bhojite. Like the basic concepts of giving, receiving, taking, revealing your mind in confidence. The basic things we keep forgetting. And so naturally the differences come in. And like you also mentioned correctly, that Sanatan Dharma is to open the mind. All other religions are to close the mind. So therefore the ideally Sanatan Dharma is for the entire world, not just for Hindus. Right. But the closing the mind, that concept is not there, and therefore many divergent ideas are there, which is which is also required for the society. Right. One last thing, which is a problem big time, and I want your views on that. Everyone expects somebody else to follow their own Ishtadev.
Huh.
And Sanatan Dharma is like every devta is a Ishtadeva somebody. In fact,
Yeah.
Durga is called Kantara Vasini. Durga
Hmm.
Kantara Vasini. Durga Kantara Vasini means she lives in Patal and she is everywhere.
Hmm.
So there are many forms of Durga all over the planet. Go to South America, go to Europe,
Hmm.
Indonesia, Australia, everywhere there is a form of Durga being worshipped there.
Hmm.
And but some people say that Durga Ashtami is a Bengal festival only. It is a Bengali festival, Durga Puja. So
Right.
so it's like, what is your views on that before we
Yeah.
start?
So say that statement again. When you asked this second question, you said something that everyone wants their Ishta Devata to be everybody's Ishta Devata, right?
Correct. Correct.
Okay. Okay. So I'll give you my views with a true humorous story. Okay. Now this I've just Devata. I'm going to replace it with again back to the food habit. Okay. Now not that I had a food habit or as some very specific subject today, but just because it was going on very active in one of my private discussion group, so it just came up. But I'll use that Adityaji to make my point. This is a real story that happened some 25 years ago. I will not mention the name of my friend, not that that is a secret, a wonderful friend of mine, still my friend after 25 plus years. And some people will also give that comment, oh, okay, come on. Like when Adityaji and Nileshji are talking, this is like a ISKCON moment, they say. Well, this is not ISKCON moment, but it has a Hare Krishna connection. Very, very interesting. So this friend of mine, this happened in Canada. um, a friend from India, northern India. And so he and me used to spend a lot of time together. He's also engineer, I'm also engineer, different disciplines. He was in civil engineering, me in chemical engineering. And so one time he invited his professor, his master's thesis professor to his house with his wife. Okay. Now see how this can happen. And again, I'm saying the ISKCON connection is this, because when Srila Prabhupada asked many of his devotees who were very qualified in terms of their background, science, engineering, and exceptional qualifications, they said you should go and interact with the scientists. And so therefore Prabhupada established Bhaktivedanta Institute, and Bhaktivedanta Institute held many conferences. I mean, I'm connected, very softly connected with them for 30 plus years. I was there in Florida for the consciousness conference not that long ago, I think 2-3 years ago. But the point is, when people ask Prabhupada, I mean, his disciples, he said, well, but what if we invite the scientist? Now, let's say he wants to drink tea or he wants to drink a glass of wine. We should drink neither tea or nor coffee or nor glass of wine. What should we tell that person? And Prabhupada said, well, it's you who want to engage that individual. You can do it on his terms. The point is, you give him a tea, you give him a coffee if he wants it, or even a glass of wine. You don't take it, because you have taken certain vows as a disciplic, as a sampradaya, philosophy of sampradaya. This is important. So now back to my friend. So he called me and said, would you also come? So there is some company. So it's not just like him and his professor and his wife. Okay. So I said, yeah, sure, I'll come. I mean, we used to always hang around together. So I go there, and this is a funny story because I'm talking of the Ishta Devata. How in a unknowing fashion you can push your Ishta Devata on someone or detest somebody's Ishta Devata. And if I get time, I'll talk about Ramdas Swami, how he has said, he says, Ishta Devata is not actually, people may think you choose it. You may even feel like as if you chose. In reality, it is based on your combination of Sattva, Raja, Tama, based on your past prarabdha, what you have achieved, and based on what you are trying to do in this life with your free will. That decides your Ishta Devata. Ishta Devata will come to you. I mean, Ramdas Swami has written, Samartha Ramdas Swami, Shivaji's Guru, has written very nicely on this. But back to this story. So professor comes, I am there, me and my friend are there at his apartment. Professor and his wife come, and they come in a typical, say, Canadian fashion, Canadian style or American style. They come up with a glass of, the bottle of wine. Okay. So they give it to my friend, And I just knew all the fun thing is going to happen. So my friend has already prepared all the non-alcoholic drinks, so to say. So for example, like there is a Sprite and there is a 7 Up, and there is a decaffeinated tea and stuff like that, and lemonade. Just think of that. So he says, he takes the bottle from the professor's hand. He says, "Thank you to professor." Also, I know what my friend is thinking. Now he's thinking inside how to get rid of this bottle because he's not going to consume it. He puts it inside, he comes out, and he again talks to professor and his wife and says, "Well, so what would you like to start with? I have these choices." And he goes, "Okay, the 7 Up, Sprite, lemonade, and water, and whatnot." But and it was such a humorous sight to see the expressions. Of course, people, Canadian being very polite, and it was all fun. But the professor and his wife, the expression on their face, they say, "What just happened here?" I mean, the person may say wine from his own house, but I brought one and he can open one. Okay, that's the custom here. He takes it inside and now he offers something else. And part of that list, there is no wine or any alcoholic drink anywhere. My point is, these actually things evolve from your time, place, and circumstances where you grow. See, there is no point blaming someone, or not. I don't mean even blaming, applying artificially a standards of one place to say someone who is living in Alaska or Siberia, extremely different climatic scenario, and what they eat, and insisting that they should have a meal just like, say, somebody in North India or South India or Western India or Bengal would have. That just not reasonable. Okay, now with time, place, and circumstances, so with time the situation has changed, and today in Fairbanks you can have a perfect Indian meal. I mean, I've been there, and I've been to an Indian restaurant there. That's a different story. But maybe like 5,000 years ago, expecting something like that would not have made sense. So therefore, I think you talked of Hindu Ekata, and then you talked of Ishta Devata. These are the things that we can discuss. Actually, we should discuss very openly, like what you and me are doing. But we should also understand, and we should also respect other person's choice. It's perfectly okay to give that person a suggestion, but it's, really not helpful. Forget about whether it's helpful to other person or not. But it's really not helpful to you as a person to look at someone at higher, lower, etc., based on their Ishta Devata choices, or just because I mentioned the dietary choices, to look at them up or below or above. Last comment, Aditya Vinobaji said it very well, especially in the context of vegetarian versus non-vegetarian. And I'm just simplifying these as two broad categories, because within vegetarian, there is a hierarchy of it. Do you eat fish and egg and milk and whatnot? And non-veg also, people will, have lots of things. I mean, somebody will eat everything else, but not dog meat, and somebody has no problem with dog meat. Vinoba made a very good point on this. Especially to vegetarians, I'm a vegetarian, lifelong vegetarian. I never consciously tested meat at all. But that's not. It doesn't matter what my personal preference is or what my personal circumstances are. His statement, I love it. He said, if you are just discussing this, I'm just taking again as example, veg versus non-veg. This can be applied anywhere. But in this context, he says, if you look at, or if you hear of somebody else as a non-vegetarian person, and therefore you feel some instability in your mind, think, are you feeling that instability or some anger or sadness or whatever it is? Is it due to Bheda Buddhi, that person is different, that person is inferior to you in some way? Or are you feeling that feeling because of a Bhuta Daya, the kindness, the affection towards all living entities? Is that your rational? Is that your driving force why you are feeling this difference? Or is it the Bheda Buddhi, which is to differentiate how that person is lower or higher than me? So those are my 10 cents, not just two. Back to you, Aditya.
Oh, what a wonderful reply, because on the Ishtadev, and you told a story also there, because today the you correctly said, it is where you're born is where that deva is responsible for it, and the whole world is connected to deva and the devis.
Hmm.
The another important thing where the Hindu ekta doesn't come in, philosophical differences, which you already said, matabhed and manabhed. You said manabhed is not
Hmm.
needed, matabhed is okay, because you can have difference of
Hmm.
opinion, and
Yeah.
Veda encourages that. There is a Shiv Puran separate, Vishnu Puran separate, Ganesh Puran separate. The Vedas, they do that. But people like Max Muller and the people who are propagandists or people who are working against you, they're Dushman and Shatru both. Now,
Mhm.
they are the ones who create this division, and that kind of division is not acceptable, because if you look at the Europe centric model,
Hmm.
every small state, every village of Europe fights with another village. That concept
Hmm.
doesn't exist in India. In India, loka samasta sukhinu bhavantu. Even if the
Mhm.
fight is between two states, but the people are not affected,
Yes.
and the faith is maintained common.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. In fact, you see that throughout the wars, right? Between when the kings are fighting, even in Indian context, Janapadas, one versus other, there was this rule that was given inherent that you are not going to torture the people, like, or people who are outside the kshatriya fold, for example, when the fighting is taking place. Now if one king wins over the land of other person, now those people may start paying the tax to this other king, now who won over the land. That is fine, but they are not tortured in any way, right? That was why that was called dharma yuddha and whatnot.
so I think Nilesh, we can start off the presentation and we'll discuss
Okay.
it while it is going on.
Okay, very good. Yeah, so we can, and we can relate to this because, whatever terrestrial is equal to celestial. Whatever happens on the ground can also be seen in the sky. That is
That's right.
the fundamental of a Ramayana and Mahabharata, and a beautiful crossword puzzle that both Sage Valmiki and Sage Vyasa used to record the details of the history for us. I mean, how fascinating. So celestial is equal to terrestrial, terrestrial is equal to celestial. Okay, so that's the theme. Let me start sharing the screen. So today, just to give you a background, again, we are going through quite a few episodes now, and we are almost at the end. This may be the second last. The planetary evidence from the Mahabharata. And there is a reason why Adityaji and myself, we are taking this time to actually do it in a more detail. Because what you will find, as many of you know, that there are these 130 plus different claims, everyone claiming that their date is right. Guess what? That what Adityaji and with this particular series that I have discussed over last 3, 4, I can't even remember the number, episodes, this whole planetary or graha evidence, no other Mahabharata researcher, none, okay, other will able to show all of this evidence or even some of this evidence. No other Mahabharata researcher will able to show all the graha evidence, planetary evidence that we are discussing here, 35 plus. I will say, let's take what? 35 is what? 3.5 is at 10%. I would say no other Mahabharata researcher will able to corroborate more than 25% of this planetary evidence for their date. 25%, not more than 25%. And I'm being very liberal. Actually, I'm convinced that they will not able to show more than 10% or so, but just, putting a number, because I don't want somebody to just fight for no reason, unnecessarily matabhed or wasting time. We have gone through different things. Today, we are going to discuss two sets of evidence. One is the eclipse evidence from Mahabharata. There is a subtitle, if you see it, it says much ado about nothing. Okay, it's a unnecessarily discussed. People are giving the Mahabharata researchers, when I say people, and even ordinary folks who don't understand anything, they will just say, oh, but what about the eclipse? And the question is, what about it? I mean, what is your question? What is it that is not valid, or what is your problem? Then there is a mercury evidence. Okay, very little. Mercury is usually very hard to spot in the sky because it's very close to the sun. So we very rarely see it. I mean, we can only see it just before sunrise. We can only see it after sunset, and quickly it's going to disappear, even before sunrise or after sunset, very short window. And a good amount of time it will just not be visible. Plus add the conditions of weather and clouds and rain and whatnot. So very little is actually seen. In spite of that, of course, Mahabharata does have a lot of evidence of Mercury, considering that Mercury is so hard to see. And we'll get to that. Very little evidence. We have already discussed Mercury evidence through the conjunctions that we discussed last time. So let me begin with the eclipse evidence. But just to quickly summarize, in one episode, we looked at the Vakri motions, okay, of two planets. And so those two planets, the Jupiter did it once and Mars did it twice during the time of Mahabharata war in 5561 BCE. Those both motions, like Mars doing near Magha and Mars also doing near Anuradha Jeshta, can only be shown to be valid for 5561 BCE. There is an additional opportunity to see if this is true. Jupiter doing it around Shravana, that can be shown. I'll not go into all the details, but just the Vakri motion, 3 instances can be shown only valid for 5561 BCE. Then we looked at Mahabharata descriptions of planets, 4 planets out of 5 visible planets. Okay, so the Mercury we just discussed, okay, and we're going to discuss it again today. But the other 4 visible planets, which is what? Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. If we are talking of planetary evidence, the retrograde motion is the most fascinating phenomenon when it comes to planetary evidence. Guess what? For all these 4 planets, the retrograde motion descriptions are given beautifully in the Mahabharata text, and they perfectly match, they show perfect corroboration with respect to the nakshatra, with respect to the timing, with respect to how exactly they made their movements for 5561 BC. So there are 4 instances of it. Then we looked at 3 instances of 7 planets, or rather 7 graha. Planets is perfectly fine. One time near sun, another time going away from the sun, and third time attacking the moon. And again, it can be shown to be valid, corroborated for 5561 BC. This is where we discussed how a theory, when you try to test it, it can actually lead to growth of knowledge that we may not have anticipated. For example, to explain this 7 graha observation, we have to take into account the possibility that Vyasa had known Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. Now, if we don't take Uranus, Neptune, Pluto in account, then as such, even in theory, it's not possible to explain 7 graha. So what is our choice? Either we can keep those 3 observations aside. And why aside? Because no Mahabharata research will able to explain it anyways. Okay. In fact, I will tell you, other than myself, other than Dr. P.V. Vartak, no other Mahabharata researcher ever dared to talk about these 3 instances of 7 graha in the context of sun and a moon. Why? Because if you don't consider Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, you cannot explain it. But let me add something. Even if somebody considers Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, there is no guarantee that you will be able to explain it. So we have done that. We also looked at another time, the Akramya. There are 2 instances, Saturn doing this and also Jupiter doing this. Again, this matches perfectly for 5561 BCE. Then we looked at 3 instances of graha giving pida, okay, pidyate, affliction, to nakshatra Rohini, sun and moon doing together on the first day of the war. Saturn, not specific day. In fact, Saturn is doing for 2 years from wherever it is near Falgunis to Rohini. And then Jupiter is doing it to Rohini, similar to what sun and moon were doing on the first day. But Jupiter is doing this on the 17th day of the war. It is that specific. Again, you can show this corroborates for 5561 BC. Last time we looked at conjunctions, and how many conjunctions? Total of 11 conjunctions, and I'm saying there could be more. Actually, since then I found a couple more, by the way, so I will not spend time on that, but they can also be beautifully shown to match for 5561 BCE. Out of those 11 conjunctions, the 4 conjunctions are already discussed here, such as the 7 grahas. In some sense they are conjunctions, or Saturn and Jupiter together near in the vicinity of Vishakha is also a conjunction. So those are the 4. And then there were 7 additional conjunctions of, say, Mercury and Mars, Mars and Venus, Venus and Mercury, and so on and so forth. Okay, and they could all be shown. And the last day, 3, Mars, Mercury, and Venus. Okay, that was a conjunction that all could be shown to be valid for 5561 BC. Well, that's not sufficient. It can be shown that they are not valid for all the other claims for the year of Mahabharat war. Now, today, we are going to look at 2. One is the eclipse evidence, and then the next one is the Mercury evidence. Now, let's begin with the eclipse evidence. What do we know about eclipses? Well, imagine Earth at the center, because we are making these observations from the surface of the Earth. And we can imagine sun's orbit around the Earth. Okay, sun rises in the morning, sets in the evening. So that's like a diurnal motion, the daily motion of 24 hours. But also remember, against the background nakshatra, sun is also moving in the eastward direction every day by about 1 degree. That's how it accounts for about 360 degrees that 1 year is completed, right? 365. That's why I said about 1 degree. So against the nakshatra background, sun is also moving, okay, with respect to Earth, as seen from the Earth with respect to the nakshatra background, in addition to its daily motion, okay, of coming up and going down. In reality, you know, it is the Earth that is rotating. Now let's put in the moon. Now what you'll find is that the moon's orbits and sun orbits, they intersect. Okay, and so once they intersect in one point, it's given that is going to intersect at another point. It has to come out also, right? Okay, so these 2 points are very important for understanding eclipses. In the Mahabharata, in the Ramayana, they are called Rahu. There is no word Ketu in the sense of the node of the moon, okay, node of the moon with the ecliptic, node of the moon's orbit with the ecliptic. In Mahabharata, it's not there. In Ramayana, it's not there in Mahabharata. So Ketu, and I'm going to put the name here because many of us in our times, we always talk of Rahu and Ketu. We understand Ketu and Rahu as a 2 nodes. It's in our times. It is not there in Mahabharata. It is not there in Ramayana. Now, could the word Ketu would have existed in astronomy? Frankly, you don't find it much, okay, in the old astronomy text. But instead of going into some controversy for no reason, I'm going to say it might have existed in astronomy text. It doesn't matter. As far as Rama and Mahabharata, and in our case right now, Mahabharata is concerned, the Ketu word is not in the use. So it doesn't matter which eclipse, whether a solar eclipse or lunar eclipse, always the word is used Rahu. Very important to realize this. True for Mahabharata, true for Ramayana. Okay. So now to remember what's going to happen is in 1 year, of course, the moon is going around every month, like 27 days, nakshatra to nakshatra, or 29, 30 days from Amavasya to Amavasya. So that moon is doing in 30 days. Now sun is going to take what? 365 days to complete the cycle. Okay. The time when the sun comes near this point of Rahu, near this point of Rahu and Ketu, the nodal point, that is the time of eclipse. You can call it eclipse season. Okay. So when the sun comes here, and it doesn't have to be exactly at that point, actually somewhat distance before and some distance after. And again, it will do it at the other point. So I would say that's approximate period of 2 months. Okay. Just to give a broad time interval of 2 months near Rahu and or node 1 and 2 months around node 2. So every year, it's why I'm saying much ado about nothing is because of this. Every year out of 12 months, there is approximately, there are 2 time intervals, we can call them eclipse season. One is when sun is near this one node, node 1, you can call it Rahu, and when sun is near node 2, or call it Ketu. And it's not just one point, although it's a mathematical point. In reality, the eclipse can happen over a period of like approximately 2 months, okay? Plus minus 1 month from that node point. Same thing on both sides. So out of 12 months, 2 months and 2 months. So total of there is approximately 4 months out of 12 months, which is what, 30% of the year. It is a eclipse season. Now, that doesn't mean every time that there are those many eclipses. No, a lot of things have to come in place, which is to say the proper alignment of the sun, earth, and moon. Okay, because all that we're watching here is a two-dimensional picture. For a eclipse to occur, a very critical, very typical, very specific types of conditions must occur between the sun, earth, and the moon for a solar eclipse or for a lunar eclipse to occur. Now, if you look at the records around the world every year, there are at least two eclipses, okay? At least two eclipses. So where do we differ? We only differ on from which place it will be seen or it will not be seen, depending on exact timing of it, and whether it is a night time or a daytime for you. So if it's a night time for you and if there is a solar eclipse, you are not going to see it. If it's a daytime, if there is a lunar eclipse, you are not going to see it unless it's like a sunset or sunrise timing. Okay, so there are two eclipses. When you go thousands and thousands of years of back, or you're discussing something through thousands of years, just multiply that number by 2 and you have at least those many eclipses happening around the world. So eclipses are frankly dime a dozen. And that's what I mean by much ado about nothing. Okay, but I'm going to tell you something more. So just keep this in mind as we get into Mahabharata evidence. Now let's look at the Mahabharata evidence. What you are seeing here is the nakshatra background system reference structure 1 through 28. Okay, so 1 is Mrugashirsha. I have given number Mrugashirsha. 7, 8 will be Purva and Uttara Falguni. Okay, 15 is like Mula, and then 22, 23 are Purva and Uttara Bhadrapadas, and so on. We have evidence in the Mahabharata text which definitely points to 2 eclipses. And in principle, it may point to 3 or 4. Okay, I mean, some people have again made much ado about nothing. Just a wasteful discussion. Most times, this discussion is done by these Mahabharata researchers to hide their failure of their own claim. So what do? They will unnecessarily, in a superfluous fashion, will discuss something to confuse the ordinary people, confuse ordinary Indians, ordinary Hindus, okay, about their own history, while pretending to be the historians and truly trying to find the date of Mahabharata. It's a very sad situation. We talked about the Hindu Ekata today and then forcing our Ishta Devata on another. Well, same thing I'll say. See, so as a Vada, what do we do? Vada, of course, there can be a discussion, Adityaji, but it also simply means you put forward your position in the most optimum way, as easy as you can make it for the consumption of the audience. Show the evidence, show the objective testing, show how you logically brought the evidence together, how you drew the conclusion, and leave it to the people. Okay, you can, when people ask the question, you can try to explain it. That itself is a vada. It doesn't have to be even a discussion. So there is no point, like you talked about the Ishta Devata, like pushing your Ishta Devata on others. No, I don't want to push my date on anybody else. It is a wonderful work. By luck, I could do it. It is there for anybody to consume, anybody to analyze, and anybody to accept or reject. Okay, and if people, for example, as a civilization, if they accept it, I'll say they deserve it, right? If they reject it, well, they deserve it, right? Because what we can take and what we reject is, at the end of the day, it is based on our intellect, our ability to comprehend, our interest, our priorities, and so on. back to the eclipse evidence. So first thing, it's unnecessarily people make Mahabharata researchers or even the ordinary folks who ask these questions in a very dull fashion, make a big fuss about it. There is no need to make a fuss because the eclipses are dime a dozen. Now, when the evidence is there, like there is evidence in the Ramayana, there is evidence in Mahabharata, we should use it. Okay, we can use it to corroborate our date. We can possibly use it to falsify certain date, or possibly find out why it's not matching. And I'm going to explain that to you. So let's look at Mahabharata evidence. We have this one evidence here which says Chaturdashi Panchadashi Bhuta Purvacha Shodashim Imam tu Nabi Janami Amavasya Trayodashim. Now, this is also people have confused many times. Okay, so just pay attention how the sequence the verse comes, Adityaji. So what Vyasadeva is saying is Chaturdashi, Panchadashi, Amavasya occurring on the 14th day or the 15th day or even the 16th day of the fortnight. That is something very common, but Trayodashim is rare, and that seemed to have occurred now. So remember first, the verse is referring to Trayodashi, the Tithi, and not first not the eclipse itself, number one. Having said that, if you go to the next line, actually it does talk about as if the eclipse is happening within a span of 13 days. Chandra Surya Vubhav Vrastav Ekamase Trayodashi, the one that I have underlined. So it says, it appears that at the time of Mahabharata war, that the lunar eclipse and a solar eclipse occurred within 1 month, okay, within a span of 13 days, Trayodashim, okay, within a span of 13 days. Now that's something, oh wow, that's not something happens every day. And, I'm so glad that people looked at this and tried to do a lot of stuff. I'm going to give you a quick summary also. One Mahabharata researcher, S. Balakrishna, I think he is down in South India right now, either teaching with, I'm not getting the name right now of the university, but one university is teaching there. He used to work for NASA and all that. What he did is he analyzed data in a mathematical fashion and basically showed that if in principle, the solar and lunar eclipse can happen within the span of 13 days, it is only possible as a mathematical possibility. And he showed couple of instances. I must add that S. Balakrishna did it maybe in last 20 years ago or so. 100 years before Balakrishna, and that's not to take away the credit from S. Balakrishna ji, because he actually did the tapasya to find this. Great astronomer of India and the world, Shankar Balakrishna Dikshit, more than 100 years ago, 120, 130 years ago, has actually looked at this and had shown by mathematical calculation that if at all this happens, actually it's a very rare, almost impossible, but if it happens, it will be a mathematical possibility. It won't be a visual observation. Now, think of it. What's the value of it? It shows that the Indian astronomy, not that this is the only evidence, Indian astronomy, we always get these allusions to a very sophisticated, very precise and very accurate Indian astronomy. This is another instance of it. A Trayodashim happening within 13 days is only mathematical possibility, not so much a visual possibility, and that even Mahabharata has picked up. Okay, it hasn't said within the 12 days. But Trayodashi, just remember, it is literally a lower limit of this interval. Then there is one more reference, and I'm not saying this is in addition to this. This could be part of this. This could be independent. We just don't know. Again, many Mahabharata researchers, in order to hide their failures, have deliberately wasted time here. For example, there is a verse, this comes into Bhishma Parva, 2nd Adhyay. It says, Alaksha at the top here, Alaksha Prabhaya Hina, Purnamasi cha Kartikim, Chandrodbhud Agni Varnasya Samavarne Navastale. What is important to realize is that, here it's saying on the Kartik Purnima, okay, the moon had, has taken the color of a fire, like coppery, which is usually what happens during the lunar eclipse, okay, and similar to the color of the rest of the sky. So sky had also become like a pink or coppery or whatever you want to say it. But the important thing to remember is that the moon can be seen coppery or a fiery red even when there is no eclipse. Okay. And you don't have to take my word. Now, I was lucky. I lived in a village and I could watch moon for throughout its whole course. And I have seen moon in all possible positions. And these days it's possible, even through the YouTube and people taking photos, and you can see that. You can find a coppery moon when it has nothing to do with the eclipse. My point is, if somebody takes this particular verse as a evidence of eclipse, I'm perfectly fine. Okay, because yes, this may refer to eclipse, but there is no guarantee that this verse necessarily is referring to eclipse. You see the difference? This can be used as a corroborative evidence for eclipse, but this is not a guarantee. So you cannot show even this verse to some Mahabharata researchers. You can show to me and I'll show you the evidence for 5561 BC. But you cannot insist another Mahabharata researchers that he or she better show a lunar eclipse on the Kartik Purnima. Not necessary. The coppery moon or a fiery moon can be seen for many reasons. I have taken pictures, many pictures from many different places in the world, and I ask people to send those. So that's one. But now back to the fact that there were at least two eclipses, one solar eclipse, one lunar eclipse. And where was it? We are not done with the problem. The problem gets bigger. Okay. But just to show you the locations of it, one eclipse that possibly, because see, sun you cannot move very fast. At the time of Mahabharata war, we already know where the sun is. It is in the region of Jeshta, just after Jeshta, because that is that Shakra Amavasya that has occurred 7 days after Krishna and Karna met. After that, 1+ month has gone by, and now the war has begun. So from Jeshta, whatever that position is, the sun would have moved through another 2 nakshatras, 2+ nakshatras, whatever that is, right? So therefore, it will be somewhere in the Mula Purvashada, that area. That's why I have shown this here. Okay. And because it's a season, eclipse season, and that can last for 2 months, deliberately I'm showing you two possible places like sun moon here and sun moon here again. And this is the place for solar eclipse. Now, exactly opposite of that would be the lunar place for lunar eclipse. So if there is a lunar eclipse on the Kartik full moon, it will be where? It has to be somewhere in the vicinity of Nakshatra Kritika. That's why it is the lunar month of Kartika, because the full moon is near Kritika. And therefore, I'm showing you this position here. Okay, so if somebody wants to show it, they can show it there. They have to show it there. And then, of course, depending on where this solar eclipse occurs, you can look at another place for another lunar eclipse. Just to clarify, for 5561 BCE, you can show a possibility or a plausibility of eclipse near Kartik Purnima, but it doesn't have to be there. You show a plausibility. Again, pay attention to the word. I'm not saying there was eclipse. In fact, there is no clear reference to solar eclipse on the first day of the war. There are a lot of descriptions which allude to it, but no clear description. We definitely have this clear description here saying that there were two eclipses, one solar and one lunar. Okay. Now, what is the problem? This is the problem. Now, this is a bit technical. I'll just focus on the area where I have highlighted with the yellow, underlined with the yellow line. Okay, and we are just going to look at 5561 BCE, but this applies. A similar analysis needs to be done for any other claim. So September 30, 5561 BCE is the Kartik Purnima, Kartik full moon in case of the 5561 claim. And if you look at the separation of an angle, it's pretty wide actually, between the sun and the moon, or sun, moon, and earth combination. It's a 2.726 degree. Now the 2 degrees is like this, and you think, well, that's not much. Well, for eclipse, you need a very tight combination. This is lunar eclipse. Now, if you look at, let's go to October 16, 5561 BCE, the first day of the Mahabharata war. This is based on a Voyager. Okay, so the angle is 1.8 degree. Okay, now this is the day of Amavasya. Now, those of you who understand eclipse, and if you don't, then you have to take my information on the Shraddha, that usually for a solar eclipse, you need an angle separation of less than 0.5. Okay, 0.5, whereas what you see here is a 1.8. It's not less than 0.5. Okay, and yeah, and then I guess if you go further, then you will get to say October 30. Okay, that's is a full moon day. This is the 15th day of the war, and there was a lunar eclipse. Look at the angle, it's like 0.127, so that's very good, okay, for this. But definitely not the September 30 and definitely not October 16. Now, if you go further and you go to say November 15, okay, for the solar eclipse, again, 1 degree difference, still not good, because we need it typically less than 0.5. Now, why I'm showing you this is the problem. I mean, I see I'm very openly sharing the angular separation data for 5561 BCE. Okay, I would encourage other Mahabharata researchers to do the same. But even when they share the data, it's not sufficient. Just like sharing this data is not sufficient. What happens is there are many other issues in predicting solar and lunar eclipses. Anytime you're trying to do it before 2000 years, so before 0 CE BC, or especially if you go beyond 2000 BC, it is a nightmare. Why is it a nightmare? You can always calculate the values like this, but there are many other factors come, technical astronomical factors come into the being. People have written paper on it, okay? And therefore, people love to fight on this. Therefore, I prefer not to even discuss the eclipse evidence, not because I have any problem discussing it, because this is like a unending business. Okay, and I'm going to show you some example of that. I showed you something similar for 3067 BC, the claim of Professor K.S. Raghavan, okay, which was blindly copied by Professor Narari HR, and in our times blindly copied and popularized, I should say, by Dr. Manish Pandit. Just to give you an idea what kind of nonsense goes into the Mahabharata research space when it comes to eclipse. All that you will find usually is Jalpa, Vitanda, Hitva, Bhasa, Chala, and Jati. Okay, please take these words, type it into and find out what the meaning is. Okay, it's like just fighting to win. Just only saying other person is wrong, but you don't have your own position. That's Vitanda. Hitva, Bhasa is a fallacy. Chala is like deliberately trying to show as if you don't understand that person's position or misrepresent that person's position. That is a chala. Many are doing it on in social media, Twitter and this and that. And then jati is a futilities, futile arguments. So 130 plus Mahabharata dating claims, many people simply do not discuss it. Do not discuss the eclipse evidence. Okay, I'm not holding anything against them, but we should ask them, guys, what are your thoughts on the eclipse evidence? What do they know about it? Many people are just clueless. Now, after my lecture, Aditya ji, they may be able to use this information and say why they don't discuss eclipse evidence. Okay. The next one, let's take a number of claim of Dr. Ashok Bhatnagar ji of 1793 BC. He pretends as if like he's discussing all the evidence, but then finally he comes down to taking Bhishma Nirvana evidence, and even that he takes in the wrong fashion. He takes one isolated selective reference of Bhishma on the bed of arrows, Bhishma stating he was there for 58 nights, ignoring all other Bhishma Nirvana references, and he does not discuss anything else. No, planetary, nothing, eclipse, nothing. I mean, just imagine how much eclipse, how much planetary evidence we discuss. Arundhati, nothing. Bhishma Nirvana, nothing other than 58, and tries to claim 1793. He does not discuss eclipse evidence. If you go to people who are in the 1400 range, for example, like Shrikant Talagiri had just pulled that number out of nowhere and said, oh, Mahabharata happened in 1400 BCE. Why? Because I say so. And you better believe it. Now, he has done a fabulous, very impressive work. We talked about the Hindu Ekata. He has done very impressive work in the other areas, Aditya ji, especially Rigveda. But Mahabharata, not even a single evidence of any kind, astronomy, hydrology, oceanography, geology, nothing will match for 1400 BC. But people just sometimes like a Ishta Devata, they are sitting on 1400 BC. What are you going to do? Just let them enjoy their life. Last one, the nonsense of the peer-reviewed journals. I bring it up because Narahari HR, Professor Narahari HR, who passed away very recently, he had taken this, borrowed this claim of Professor K.S. Raghavan and continued to defend it, okay, in a very unhealthy fashion. But be it as it may, him versus Professor R.N. Iyengar, okay, and who claims 1478 BC, they have written papers fighting each other, which is great. I mean, Vada is good because it leads to knowledge, growth of knowledge, discussing eclipse evidence. And these papers are in the peer-reviewed journals. And I would encourage everyone who is listening to this to go find those papers and read them and watch all the fun. Okay, just to give you a highlight, and I'll move on quickly. For example, 3067 BCE, first Professor Achar claimed certain numbers. Okay, these are the eclipses. Then Professor R.N. Iyengar showed why those eclipses will not be visible from India. Okay, now who is right, who is wrong, I'm not telling you. I'll give you my quick thoughts. So then Professor Narahari HR had to agree with it. Okay, what Professor R.N. Iyengar was saying, at least based on a certain agreed upon calculations like a simulation, software simulation or manual calculations, that was correct. So Professor HR invoked the argument, which I stated somewhat before, is that it is difficult to predict with accuracy the eclipses if you go beyond, say, 2000 years. And he is right about it. Okay. Now, what is important is that if you are taking that as an excuse, and in this case, I would say even a genuine excuse, then you cannot just take that excuse but continue to blame somebody else like Professor R.N. Iyengar or any other Mahabharata researchers. Oh, but he cannot show the eclipse there. What you can show, just like I showed you for the specific days, September 30, 5561 BCE, 16 October 5561 BCE, and then what was that? 30 October again 5561 BCE. Yes, there is a conjunction-like phenomenon, okay? And you can show the degree of separation. But what is calculated using astronomy software may not be sufficient. At least it may not appear sufficient for an eclipse. So was there really an eclipse or not? Well, that is the problem. Because as you go back in the past, predicting the alignment, the position, and the timing of when moon would be in a certain position is not very precise and accurate. And that causes all these problems. Okay. So I would encourage you to look at this. But if there is any summary for the eclipse evidence, yes, there is an eclipse evidence in Mahabharata. It is not critical. It is not important to decide whether this particular year is the year of Mahabharata war or not. It is useful and it should be used, but it has its intrinsic limitations. And therefore, if anyone you find, either a researcher or even an ordinary person asking this question, as like ordinary people, like, after my presentation or somebody's presentation, asking a question about eclipses in a smart ass fashion, basically just ignore it. Okay. The person has not done his or her homework. Okay. So with that, let's move on to the Mercury evidence. Okay. So what do we have? In the last time when we discussed conjunctions, we actually discussed a lot of Mercury evidence. Okay, there were at least 3 or 4 instances where Mercury was the Mahabharata evidence talked of Mercury with Venus, Mercury with Mars, and things like that. And on the last day of the war, there is a description of Mars, Mercury, and Venus together, seen in the east direction, that is in front of Yudhishthira on the last day of the war. Okay, so we have this one evidence, conjunction evidence that I'm not repeating, I just verbally said it. Then there is one more verse which says, Trishu Purveshu Sarveshu Nakshatreshu Vishampate Buddha Sampatate Bhikshnam Janayat Samudbhayam. Some the people are feeling fearful, etc. Now, I am not good at translation of Sanskrit. I have looked at 6+ different translations. The people have interpreted in 3-4 different ways, and none of them includes mine. I did not interpret it. But the point is, one of them at least says, or many of them says, that the Mercury, it appears that Mercury was ahead of the sun Okay, this is Trishu Purveshu Sarveshu Nakshatreshu Vishampate. Buddha was ahead of the sun by 3 nakshatras. If we take that translation, if we take that interpretation, then it is possible to show for 5561 BC that while the sun's position is here, the Mercury was like was going through 16, 17, 18. And I'm going to show you in a minute, okay? 16, 17, 18, 19, somewhere there, like 3 nakshatra ahead. So that is another evidence. Now there is a one more, and it says Tiryak evidence of Mercury, or Tiryak rising of Mercury. This is the story on the 17th day of the war. Karna was killed by Arjuna. And if you remember, we discussed in a Pidyate episode how Jupiter was afflicting Rohini after sunset on this 17th day of the war. In those descriptions, right in that area, we also have this description, Hate Karne Saritona Prasanno, after the Karna has been killed by Arjuna, Jagam Chastam Savita Divakara, now sun set on the horizon, Grahascha Tiryak, that is that word Tiryak, Grahascha Tiryak Jwalanarka Varna, Somasya Putro Abhyudaya Tiryak. Just pay attention to the word Tiryak. It also kind of means oblique and non-normal, abnormal, something of that effect. And then Somasya Putra. Somaputra is Mercury. Abhyudaya Tiryak. Okay, that Tiryak, it came in a bit weird fashion, you can say, but Abhyuday, like it's rising, okay, in a Tiryak fashion, in non-normal, abnormal, something funny, you can say fashion. So what is happening? If you start looking at the dynamics on the western horizon, when the sun is setting, through the 18 days of the war, because this is on the 17th day of the war, this description, this is what you will find. Okay, so I'm just giving you the simulations here. So this is the sun here. These are some stars, but look where the Mercury is right now and where Jupiter is. Okay, so this is the western horizon. And now we are going up in the sky. So this is Mercury, this is Jupiter. That's how the scene was on the first day of the war. If you go to 22nd of October, which is like, say, 7th day of the war, notice what has happened. That Mercury, I mean, sun is also going to move in 1 degree every day, but Mercury has gone ahead of these stars, Nunki and whatnot, and has come much closer to Jupiter. Okay, just pay attention and I'll explain what I mean by this. Now, if you come to October 28th, I think, that is the day, 13th day then, Abhimanyu was killed on this day. Notice what is happening. Mercury has now gone further east of Jupiter. So Mercury is, it's like, so I'll finish this. And then if you go to 1st of November, which is 17th day of the war, what do you see? Mercury has even crossed Jupiter, bypassed Jupiter and gone further eastward, you can say. Okay. What does that mean is, usually we will say the sun, moon, they rise in the east and so on and so forth. Here, what is interesting is that as if through the 18 days of the war, Mercury is rising from the west. Hardly anything rises from the west. Well, in exceptional cases like retrograde, they would. In this case, it's not even a Mercury retrograde per se, but that's what Mercury will do with respect to the sun. So the distance between the sun and the Mercury is increasing every day, and Mercury is to the east of the sun. Therefore, anybody watching the western horizon for the 17 days of the Mahabharat war, every day he would have seen that the Mercury is rising up. And what I am saying is that is the Tiryak rising of Mercury. Just my last point. Now, somebody is going to immediately jump and says, just going to laugh at it. Usually that Hindu Ekata or the Matabhed or whatever you're talking, Manabhed, the person is going to laugh at saying, come on, is that a Tiryak rising of Mercury? Well, this is my explanation. If you don't want to become a Vitandi, okay, because that means you accepting your defeat, then you have to, if any other Mahabharata researcher does not agree with this explanation, then he or she has to come up with their alternate explanation for the Tiryak rising of Mercury on the 17th day of the war for whatever year they are claiming. Okay. And that was seen and that was recorded by Vyasa. And it says exactly when. After Jagam Chastam Savita Astam Savita Divakara. After the sun was set on the 17th day of the war, Mercury was seen rising in a Tiryak fashion. This is my explanation. This is a beautiful explanation. I have not heard of any other Mahabharata researcher even discussing this, even attempting it. Okay. So this is how sometimes the bankrupt the scenario is when it comes to Mahabharata research, Aditya. Quickly, I'm going to do summary and we'll stop. So we started with the Vakri motion. Okay. We looked at this. Then we added retrograde. So we did this together. Then we looked at the 7 planets attacking the sun, moon, and near sun and going away from the sun. That was another episode we did. The next episode that we did, we looked at the Akramya motion of Saturn and Jupiter with respect to specific nakshatra, and 3 sets of graha doing a pida to Rohini through the 18 days of the war. That's what we did together. Last time, we did episode on the conjunctions, all the planetary conjunctions. Okay. Today, we discuss the eclipse evidence, definitely 2 eclipses, possibly up to 3 eclipses or 4 eclipses. It doesn't matter. As far as the Mahabharata evidence is concerned, it is referring to 2 eclipses happening within a period of 13 days or so. We must take it with a grain of salt unless somebody proves it and shows it that it is possible. It's only possible mathematically, theoretically, and other evidence must match. That generally doesn't happen. What else? Then the Kartik full moon. There could be eclipse. There may not be eclipse. Both scenarios are fine. So if somebody shows eclipse, we should give that person a credit. If somebody cannot show eclipse, we have no reason to take the credit from that person. Okay, it doesn't matter which or who Mahabharata researcher that is. Why? That is because of the limitation, intrinsic limitation of the eclipse data. That is the only reason. Okay, if tomorrow, if our knowledge of the prediction of the past improves, then we should revisit this evidence of eclipse. In fact, we should never give it up. Okay, because just like I showed you, you can actually right now with the sophisticated astronomy still analyze the conjunction data for eclipses, just like I showed you for 5561 BC and also another year, I think it was 3067. It can be done for anything else. And then we looked at, just summarize the conjunctions of Mercury, but we also discussed 2 additional motion. One is Mercury ahead of the sun within a 3 nakshatra space, Trishu Purveshu Sarveshu, okay, and Nakshatreshu Vishampate, that evidence. And then the Tiryak rising of Mercury after sunset on the 17th day of the war. Okay, so quickly, if you want to know more about all this exciting stuff, but in a technical language, it is in these books. If you are in India, through Subbu publication. If you're outside, through Amazon. Quick summary. There are 35 plus planetary descriptions in the Mahabharata. We looked at Vakri, we looked at Sthai or retrograde, we looked at 7 planets, which requires assumption of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. If you don't take it, no big deal, but then you will not able to explain those 3 references, period. Just because you accept the assumption of Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, it's not a guarantee that for your particular date, you will able to show 7 planets. You can show this for 5561 BC. Akramya plus Pida, there are 2 instances for Akramya, 3 instances for Pida, and then conjunction, total of 11 conjunctions. We looked at them. Eclipses, definitely 2. It could be 3, it could be 4. And then the Tiryak moment of Mercury on the 17th day of the war, and then Mercury through 3 nakshatras ahead of the sun. And that's what we looked at. So with this, Aditya, I don't know if I went over a time, but we almost covered the planetary evidence. Next time, what the last episode on this theme we will do is phases and positions of the moon through the 18 days of the war. It's going to be fascinating.
Oh, this is amazing because see, most of the people, they reject, they have been told Jyotishi is a mythology and it is not a science. Astronomy is a is just not important. Then if the seasons come, winter and summer, now winter is coming here,
Hmm.
and they automatically change the clothes. So the stars are important, sun is important, moon is
Mhm.
important, but the mythology is that these are not important, and mostly it comes from the western authors. Then why do they send the moon, the satellites, depending on
Hmm.
the movement of the sky? They calculate all those things. So what is
Hmm.
your view on that?
Well, my view is this. In an Indian context, I can say that many pseudo astrologers, like a Phala Jyotishi, okay, this is not my expertise. So I don't know how to, I mean, I know somewhat how to demarcate between a real Jyotishi and a pseudo Jyotishi, Jyotishi in the sense of Phala Jyotishi. But many people, driven by commercial interest, have given a bad name because I do not know how the astrology actually works. I mean, I understand the fundamentals of the Karma Siddhanta and everything. Any gravitational body has an effect on another gravitational body. We are also gravitational body. So I understand in principle. But why Saturn in a certain position in your horoscope tends to do this thing, I do not understand. I don't claim to understand. But I know good astrologers, Jeffrey Armstrong. I mean, he's been on your show. I know he's a very good astrologer, amazing astrologer. One of the other individual who I met through Jeffrey, Laura Plum. I mean, she does also astrology practice consulting. Ashwini, my wife, she does it. I mean, we fight over that subject at home. But what she does, I mean, it's very very fascinating. I mean, I'm just looking at the output in an engineering fashion. We call the continuum mechanics. Like I don't care what happens inside the box, but I give some inputs and some output, and I care if the output matches with the evidence. And for example, Ashwini, I mean, her accuracy is like 80, 90%. I'm just giving 80 as a lower number. It's a 90 or higher, which is very impressive. In fact, whenever she is doing consulting, and of course, because it's a personal nature of consulting, it's always confidential. But when she does the consulting and she comes out from other room and she says, okay, my meeting is over or something, and I ask her, so how did it go? And I'm not interested in the specifics of that person, but what I'm always interested is which predictions she got it right, which predictions, if any, she got it wrong. Does she know why they might have gone wrong, and so on and so forth, which is not any different than how a science is done, right from Ptolemy to Copernicus to Kepler. I mean, just thinking of cosmology, or how the science of evolution, like Darwin's theory, and how it was improved and punctuated equilibrium with Stephen Jay Gould and everything that happened. The quantum mechanics. I mean, take any subject, chemical reaction engineering, how to improve. It's the same methodology. Okay, it's the same methodology, same truth likeness score or verisimilitude score that we talk about, just like a tennis match that I described. Nothing changes. But to answer your question, there are many people who will refuse to invest time, refuse to study, refuse to put tapasya, and then driven by a quick success, market interest, commercial interest, they may do this. And this is just my speculation somewhat. They bring the bad name to some of these professions, which as an empirical science, they can be very good, although we don't know exactly understand. At least I don't understand how, I mean, who set up these rules and how they, like Parashar Hora Shastra or before, how they came up with those rules. I mean, that's the fascinating part I'm referring to. I just don't know how they did it. Was it like a immense collection of empirical data, and then they formulated into a directional laws or directional heuristics? It's a fascinating subject for many people to research. I mean, hundreds of people could be busy for 100 plus years, and then maybe we will start understanding how our great sages might have done this.
Thank you so much, and thank you for viewers for watching. The video became very long, but I'm glad all of you
My apologies.
stayed back, and we did have a discussion before and after, so that's why it is long. And I did ask all your questions, and if you have anything, Do comment on YouTube. I mean, I see a wonderful discussion going on YouTube, and Nilesh himself is answering those questions. So that is, thank you, Nilesh, for that. So namaste and enjoy your weekend.